Good afternoon. My name is Irv Gross. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Constellation Audio, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about our brand, my position in it, where we are, and some things about where we're going. So I've been in the business for about 44 years. I started in 1978 when I was a graduate student at the University of Colorado studying and teaching philosophy and literature. I got into this business because, like many of us, I love music. And as a young man, I had the opportunity to be in England when the Beatles broke, to travel around the world with my father, who was in the military, and to hear wonderful music. When I was in high school, I had the opportunity to work at a radio station, which was right next to our high school. And at that time, I learned about more and different types of music. So music has always been important to me. As I was finishing my graduate career, there was an opportunity to work at a stereo store in Boulder, Colorado, where I was going to school. And so it was a part-time job, and I thought this would be a good way to supplement my income, and besides, maybe get involved with a stereo system and at some point get a real job. Well, it turned out there was far more interest in music than there was in people hiring philosophers. So I ended up staying in this business. I worked in the retail business in the Denver and Boulder area of Colorado for about 15 years. At that point, I had the opportunity to join the sales staff at Krell Industries in Orange, Connecticut. This was at the peak when Krell was doing fabulous amplifiers, and they were really the dominant force, certainly one of the two dominant forces in American amplifier design. So I moved from Colorado to Connecticut and had the opportunity to work for Dan D'Agostino and Krell Industries for 10 years. I learned a lot about sales, I learned a lot about marketing, and I learned a lot about amplifier design. One of the things that I learned at Krell was that there are several different tiers in different markets for different price points, and that has served me well. After working for Krell for 10 years, I then joined Magico Loudspeakers, and this was a company that was on the up and up, made some very interesting designs, continue to make some very interesting loudspeakers, headed by a musician and a designer by the name of Alon Wolf, with technical expertise from a physicist and a mathematician in Israel. I learned a lot there as well. And after working for Magico for 6 years, one of the things that I discovered was that we would do shows together, and we would do shows as a speaker manufacturer. We'd always need an amplifier partner. We would frequently partner with Constellation. And I noticed that whenever we would pair our speakers with Constellation electronics, not only did we get great sound to our ears, but we won a lot of recognition for best in show, and a lot of people loved the way we worked together. So when the time came for me to move on from Magico, I had developed a relationship with some of the people at Constellation, and we had some conversations. At that time, Constellation Audio was in the process of introducing a new series of electronics, and I'll get there in a minute. We had some conversation, we decided it would be a good fit, let's try it. It's been 8.5 years since I've been with Constellation now, and it's a great company to work for, it's a great company to work with, it's a great company to represent to our dealers, our distributors, and people who have the common value of the joy and love of music in their home. So a little bit about Constellation Audio that I've learned over the years and had the privilege to enjoy. Constellation Audio was founded more than a decade ago, and they came about in a rather interesting fashion. The owners of the company are Australian, and they've been around for a while, And as they surveyed the audio landscape, one of the things that they observed is that there is a tremendous amount of intellectual capital in this industry. But the intellectual capital is kind of scattered in that some companies do one thing well, some companies do other things well, and some designers do some things well, but not other things. So, for example, some companies were known for their preamps, others were known for power amps, others for phono stages. So we decided, wouldn't it be cool if we could take all of this intellectual capital, put it together under one brand, and have a unity where each segment that we produced would be very good. And that's what we did. So we gathered not only the intellectual audio capital that we could, we also gathered intellectual property from people in the industrial design world, in the metal world, in the circuit design world, and in the software world. And if you look at the roster of people that we started out with, many of these people could be considered stars in their own right. If you take a step back and you see a group of stars, and the stars all fit together in kind of a coherent whole, you could say that's a constellation. And so with that type of a worldview, Constellation Audio was born. And so that's where the company began. And when we began, we decided, well, what's the best way to make an impression in the marketplace? Well, in this industry, there's a saying, go big or go home. So that's exactly what we did. The first product that we introduced was a very large power amplifier called the Hercules. It was a big, tall, vertical amplifier. And its matching preamp was called the Altair. This amplifier did very well for us. It caught the attention of reviewers, it caught the attention of magazines, it caught the attention of the buying public. And we were very fortunate that the product performed as advertised. The accolades followed. We soon received awards and covers on magazines such as The Absolute Sound in the United States and others globally. And so with that on the map, people came to notice Constellation was a brand. Constellation Audio was a brand that they should pay attention to. And so what would be the next step? Well, a flagship amplifier is great, but the reality of the marketplace is that there's a finite number of people for a flagship amplifier and a flagship preamplifier simply due to the size and the price point. So we decided, let's try to broaden the line. So the first step was to introduce a more modest priced amplifier and a slightly scaled down preamplifier. And instead of it being part of the reference series, which is what the Altair and the Hercules are, it became known as the Performance Series. We introduced the Performance Series, which consisted of the Centaur amplifier and the Virgo preamplifier. In addition, we introduced a product called the Perseus Phono stage. Just a little side note as to how some of these pieces fit together. One of the preeminent designers in the audio industry is a phono designer by the name of John Curl. And John's had a great deal of success with numerous vendors over the years. And a couple of things I can share with you about John. Number one, he's an absolute master at designing phono stages. And number two, he doesn't like to do anything else other than design phono stages. So this was a perfect fit for Constellation Audio in that he designed the Perseus Phono stage. He was part of one of the major forces behind the design team of the Perseus. And it became a Constellation Audio preamplifier. It allowed John to do what he does best and allowed us to bring a great phono preamp to the market. So with that, we had three products. We had the Virgo preamplifier, we had the Perseus Phono stage, and we had the Centaur amplifier, available both as a stereo and as a mono version. And shortly thereafter, we also introduced an integrated amplifier in the series called the Argo. And the Argo was nice because in a number of our markets, there is a demand for high quality product, but space is at a premium. So the Argo successfully combined essentially the preamp section of the Virgo and half of a Centaur amplifier and included a headphone amp with it. So it gave a lot of people the flexibility that they desired. So with that, we really were able to reach a much wider audience. However, we still wanted to grow our business, and we still were hearing requests from our dealers, from our distributors, and from the buying public for a more affordable design, yet that still bore the Constellation Audio signature. And so about 8.5 years ago, about the time that I joined the company, Constellation Audio introduced what we call the Inspiration Series. And the Inspiration Series differed from its larger sibling, the Performance Series, in a number of ways, not the least of which is the chassis design. The chassis design on the Inspiration Series, which it shares with the Revelation Series, which we see here, is a much simpler design. It's not as complex to produce, it's not as sophisticated, and it's not nearly as expensive to produce. So it allowed us to use a chassis which had some economies of scale, yet which allowed us to keep a signature look, which you can see in the side panels, which all of our amplifiers share. So we introduced the Inspiration preamp, the Inspiration power amp, and we also introduced the Inspiration integrated amp, which became really the entry-level point for Constellation Audio. The Inspiration Series was a great success. It won numerous awards. It really broadened our market to a lot of people that had never heard of or been able to afford Constellation Audio. Well, that was fine and dandy, except for one little marketing problem, and that is we had the Reference Series here, we had the Performance Series here, and we had the Inspiration Series here. And so we had kind of a gap between the Inspiration Series and the Performance Series. So he said, what can we do? What's the most efficient way to fill that gap? So the Revelation Series was born. And the Revelation Series kind of represents the best of both worlds. And I'll try to explain that. From a design and manufacturing standpoint, it uses the same chassis design as the Inspiration Series. From a performance standpoint, it takes a lot of the features of the Performance Series and incorporates them into the Revelation Series. I'll give you a couple of specific examples. In the Inspiration Series, the amplifier is simply called the Inspiration Stereo, and it's a 200 watt per channel stereo amplifier. With the Revelation Series, it's from the front and the side, from the front and top, it looks the same. However, the amplifier is this much deeper. That extra depth allows us to incorporate another transformer back there. So while the power only goes from 200 to 250 watts per channel, going from the Inspiration amplifier to the Taurus stereo amplifier, the difference is incredibly large. That extra transformer allows us to have more control over the bass, much greater dynamics, much more free-flowing sound there. In the case of the preamplifier, and that's the Pictor preamplifier there, it uses the exact same chassis as the Inspiration preamplifier. However, in our industry, we know that noise in any shape or form is something that is to be avoided whenever possible. One of the ways that we avoid noise is that we, like other manufacturers, know that if you separate out the power supply from the control center, you can reduce the noise. So what we did is we took the Inspiration preamplifier, put the controls in there, and then separated out the power supply, which is underneath it. In doing that, it allowed us to incorporate something that we had been using in the Performance series called a DC filter. The DC filter fits between the power supply and the control unit and acts as a further layer to reduce noise. So when we went to the Pictor preamplifier, we were able to allow use of the DC filter. If you look directly above that, you'll see the Andromeda Phono stage. The Andromeda Phono stage is, again, a good example of the best of Inspiration and the best of the Performance series. It uses the same basic chassis as the Pictor. It uses the same separate power supply and incorporates a DC filter. The difference between this and the Perseus Phono stage in the Performance series is it has one fewer input on it, and it has less control over setting up the fine-tuning the controls for the turntable, for the cartridge. By doing this, it allows us to get the maximum amount of value by using the design of the Inspiration series with the technology of the Performance series. So this is where the amplifier line is right now. This is where we are right now. So we've been very successful in the 10 or 12 years that Constellation Audio has been doing it, and I've had a great deal of fun in the 8.5 years that I've had the privilege of being with the company. But there's two questions that I keep getting asked, and I can answer them both right now. And that is, what's coming from Constellation Audio and when? Well, or really, is there anything new coming from Constellation Audio? And the answer to that question is yes, but I can't tell you anything about it. Well, I can tell you a little bit about it. The Inspiration series has been around for 8.5 years. The Revelation series for about 6. We are working on the next generation of Inspiration and Revelation. When it will happen, to tell you the truth, I don't know. The global pandemic and the trade situation has made life very difficult for a lot of manufacturers, including Constellation Audio. Getting parts, getting the necessary test equipment, getting what we need to do on the research and development side has been far more difficult and time-consuming than we expected. But we're at the point right now where we're in the next stage of development where I can say that, I don't know, maybe don't hold a gun to my head, but maybe sometime later next year we should see the next thing. Now, the next question is kind of a teaser, and that is there going to be something brand new from Constellation Audio? And the answer is yes, but I can't talk about it right now. But stay tuned for the next 30 to 60 days, and we will have some announcements to make. We're that close. Again, we really wish we could have made the announcement. We really wish we could have had the product on the market by now. But the realities of the world have been such that hasn't happened yet, but we're really close, and I think it's going to be a fun product. And when I say a fun product, you know, we're in this business because we love music. And one of the things about Constellation Audio and the people that are involved with the company at all stages, from the CEO to the people that build it, to me, is we love music. And people want to know, well, what's the Constellation Audio sound? You know, what makes you guys do what you do? And the best way I can describe it is all of our amplifiers are solid-state amplifiers, and they're solid-state amplifiers for a reason. People tend to like bass, and a good solid-state amplifier has the ability to take control of bass, okay? Now, all of our amplifiers do that well. What is also part of the Constellation Audio DNA is we are very transparent through the mid-range and extended through the high frequency. So we have the control that you expect from a powerful solid-state amplifier in the bass, but we also have the liquidity, the air, the dynamics throughout the entire range of the line. So that's an important part of the Constellation Audio DNA. Another part that's important to understand is all of our amplifiers are solid state and they all use the same transistors. And by that I mean when we spec the transistor for the Inspiration stereo amplifier, it's the same transistor model number that we use in the Hercules amplifier. The difference is that when we go to make the Inspiration amplifier, we grab the transistors. If they work, we put them in the amplifier. As we move up the line to the point when you get to the Performance and the Reference series, the tolerances get much narrower. So not only are they matched left and right, they're matched positive and negative. So theoretically, it's possible that two identical transistors pulled out of the parts bin going into Inspiration would be the same as in the Hercules. But when you get to the Hercules, you know that they're at that level of tolerance. So that is also part of the Constellation Audio DNA, because people talk about the similarities, the quote, house sound, that when you listen to an Inspiration series amplifier, you can tell, yeah, that does sound like a Constellation Audio amplifier. Maybe it doesn't have quite that bottom end, maybe it doesn't have quite that grip on the bass, maybe the extended highs are not that they are in a Centaur or a Hercules, and they're probably right, but you can tell they're part of the same family, and that's an important part of who Constellation Audio is and why we do it. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, music has the ability to cut through a lot of the crap that differentiates us. And I remember being in Portugal several years ago, and I was doing a demonstration, and I said to the folks there, I said, you know, I don't speak Portuguese. Most of you don't speak much English, but we could put on a Bach Brandenburg concerto and listen and smile, and at the end of the day, raise our spirit as human beings. And that's not such a bad thing, you know? So that's also part of the attitude, that's part of the ethos, that's part of who Constellation Audio is. And I'm happy to share that with you. One other thing I'd like to share with you. Constellation Audio has been very pleased over the years to have been used with many of the world's finest loudspeaker manufacturers. We have demonstrated with Wilson Audio, we've demonstrated with Magico, Rockport, Martin Logan, some of the finest loudspeaker manufacturers in the world. A couple of things stand out from these experiences. Number one, when we demonstrate with these various speaker companies, they always love the way their speakers sound with our electronics. That tells us something very important. Number two, for anyone who is listening who may have a high quality loudspeaker that I haven't mentioned, one of the fun things about Constellation Audio electronics is they allow you to hear what the speaker and what your system is capable of. So we describe ourselves as being amplifier agnostic and cable agnostic. So whatever your local dealer, your local distributor recommends in terms of speakers and cables, you should feel comfortable and confident that if you use a Constellation Audio amplifier, preamplifier, or phono stage, you will be able to hear the best of what your system is capable of.